Good morning. So thank you for joining me and my hangover this morning. Thank you to all of you who are also braving hangovers. I like talks to be relatively interactive because one, it will help me stay awake, and two, otherwise I could have just sent you a link to a YouTube video and you could have just watched that from your hotel room. So please feel free to just kind of stop me mid-session and ask questions if you want to, or just shout random things out. My name is Rowan. You can find me on Twitter here. So if you don't feel like shouting at me in real life, but would like to shout at me on the internet, you can also do that on Twitter. I work at Google. I'm a developer advocate there, which effectively means that I try and help move the state of the industry forward and try and help people follow best practices and even occasionally invent best practices as well. Today, I want to talk to you about progressive web apps. So first of all, some mandatory hand raising. Who has heard of this term before? Did you, oh wow, you're very well prepared. Did you all go to the workshop as well? Who went to the workshop? Okay, that's good, because if you had gone to the workshop, you probably shouldn't be in this talk, because you will have spent like an entire day doing this, which we're going to compress into 45 minutes. What I wanted to do was take this opportunity to go through the definition of progressive web apps, but also show you some examples from around the internet to basically give you an idea of what you can go back and hopefully apply to the site or sites that you are working on or maintain as a hobby, or just randomly find on GitHub and want to do some kind of charitable act of contributing code to them. So the term progressive web app then has a number of definitions. For me, there are two important ones. And firstly, there's this. So this is really the term that allows us as developers to create this quantifiable definition. So that's kind of the important bit for me, is because previously we used to say Web 2.0, and no one was really sure what that meant, other than the consultancy fees were a bit higher than for a Web 1.0 project. But progressive web apps has a very set definition. We'll go through exactly what that means. So it is, whilst I feel it is kind of it's almost like a philosophical or branding term that helps explain these best practices to your clients, to C-level people, to the wider world. It allowed us to have an article in Wired with the term on there, but it actually translates into real things that can be measurably applied to a project. But then the other side of that is, as a user or as a normal human being, it allows you to start raising your expectations about what is possible on the web. What can you expect, not from some kind of crazy wrapped website, so not Flash, not Java, but what can you expect from web standards, from open technologies, from everything that we believe is good about the web? How can we take that and really push it as far as possible, not simply for the sake of doing something cool, but for the sake of creating the best user experience that we can? Okay. So in kind of diagram form, this is what I'm trying to get at here. Who considers themselves a scientist? No? Yes. Okay. So I apologize for not labeling these axes at all, and also I'm not entirely sure what the units are on either of these axes, but bear with me on this one. We kind of this is what we have. We have our user down here, who is not very happy because they are just dealing with a terrible website. And as we apply some of these features, we're going to reach a kind of a hockey stick curve where suddenly happiness is going to shoot up, and then eventually there's the kind of top level curve where you can continue to put effort in, but you're not going to get as much happiness from that boost. And these are the kind of areas that I'm talking about. So this is what I'll walk you through, is the kind of how to build a baseline PWA, so the sort of the minimum entry criteria, your MVP for creating a progressive web app. And then towards the end, we'll explore what we call the exemplary criteria. So these are the kind of added effort things you can do to really create this entirely rounded experience. Okay. I'm going to share the slides afterwards. This is why I'm showing you things that have unreadable links on them and large blocks of text. I'm not expecting you to read this now. I was also expecting the screen to be slightly bigger, so some of the text might be tiny. But this is what we consider the baseline checklist. So you can see there, we're talking HTTPS, we're talking responsive, the add to home screen functionality, the ability to work offline, cross-browser support, page transitions, and every page has a URL. Since I'm mostly, actually, this is not a trick question because of the conference, who is a PHP developer? Yes, good. And who would also like equally consider themselves a JavaScript developer? Okay, pretty good, yeah. So this is one of those ones where there are some misconceptions around progressive web apps. A lot of people have thought that a progressive web app must be a single page app. So a lot of this does come from very JavaScript heavy sites where people assume that to do a lot of this functionality, it means you can't do anything server-side rendered, you need to do it all on the client. When I talk to PHP developers, that's generally less of a misconception because PHP developers prefer to do as much as they possibly can on the server before they push it over to the client. Okay, let's dive into this then. Of course, the best way to do any of these things is to automate the checks involved. So we have a tool called Lighthouse. You can get the Chrome extension here, or if you're using Chrome Canary, then this is also built into the developer tools as well. If you go to the Audits tab, then you can run both performance audit, best practices audit, and the Lighthouse audit as well. And you'll notice here, this is my subtle messaging. The Lighthouse is highlighting use. See? Use the Lighthouse. Yeah? I thought that was very clever. So please feel free to tell everyone else how clever that is. Okay. But this is the idea. So you can get the extension, and you can easily just run these checks against any site. So I picked a random site to run these checks against to illustrate this. I may or may not get to come back and do another talk here. We'll see. So what happens is you can see up in the corner, I have the little icon. So I tap it, and I'll tap Generate Report there, and that will begin running through the various tests that it's performing. So the checklist that I showed you there, it's automating the checks against this. And at the end, it will spit out a report. So thankfully, actually the DPC site does very well. So they score well on best practices, accessibility, and performance. And then it's the progressive web app side where there's 55 there, but this is actually good because this means that there's a whole bunch of really easy things that can be done to improve that score. And what I would also say is I would encourage you to go back and run this on your own business's site or your personal site just to see what comes up, because as well, you can see all the X's there. Each of those are actually then provided with a sort of link of what you need to do to fix that as well, should you so wish. And to make you feel a little bit better as well, I thought, what if we run this on a different site, like php.net, and see what happens there? And that drops even further down. So what I find is that even though we've had the sort of the brand out there for a while, there is, I believe how teachers used to term this in school, there is room for improvement. Okay, let's dive into these checks then. Site served over HTTPS. This should hopefully be a fairly straightforward one for everyone. Who is actually like HTTPS by default on their sites? Yeah, oh, okay, about 50. Now, what I find is, again, each of these terms, they are technical checks. They are not necessarily checks that map to exactly what is happening inside of your business. And Lighthouse as well, whilst Lighthouse gives you a score, what I will say is don't necessarily sit there and think that you need to chase a score of 100, because this is the same kind of thinking that says, well, if the unit tests pass, the code must be good. That is not the case. So getting a score of 100 in Lighthouse, all that means is that you have a score of 100 in Lighthouse. It's not an indication that you've done something right. It's an indication that you've passed some automated checks. So use the tool in the way it's intended, which is to help you, not to simply chase getting this green light and a good score. With HTTPS, what I often find is that some of the reasons for not being on HTTPS is maybe you have quite a complicated infrastructure, so you have an old CDN that hasn't migrated across. Maybe you want to show ads on your site and your ad network doesn't support HTTPS yet. That is rapidly changing. Or some of the more interesting ones, maybe you're in a country that actually regularly blocks things on the internet, which is rapidly becoming the UK as well. But what I have found here is that in countries like that, if you're, say, publishing a news site, then if you are just publishing on HTTP and the government chooses to block an article, then they will simply block that individual article. If your site is HTTPS, they don't have access to the path, and their option is to simply block your entire site. So a lot of these technologies are gated behind HTTPS, so it's a good practice, but at the same time, I recognize that there are political situations beyond the control of developers that might mean that you can't always do this. But the always and only aspect comes down to this. So we can see a little example of how this works. If you curl stripe.com, then the response will come back with a 301 redirect to the HTTPS. But interestingly, if you also look at the headers that come back there, you'll see this one. So the strict transport security header, which will give an age and also the include subdomains aspect. So so that I can gauge whether you're interested in this or not. Who has already implemented the HSTS header? What, oh, 3? Okay, good. So this is new to you. What this does is, this is the strict transport security protocol. So by returning this header in the response from your server, what you're telling the browser is that in future, you always want to use the HTTPS version of the site. What that means is when the browser comes back to that site again, even if the user types in HTTP, the browser will ignore that and will automatically go to the HTTPS version of the site. So the user will only see that redirect once. From there on in, they will always go to the HTTPS version of your site. So it's one of those ones where if you're concerned about, say, the length of time that the user is going to have to be going through that redirect or their bookmarks or so on, then this is a way of mitigating that and ensuring that they always get the secure version. And what you can also do, this is a good way to check how far along your site is as well. We have HSTS preload. If you go there, you pop the domain name in, then it will run a number of sites on the domain. And if it passes, then this preload list is actually used by Chrome and a couple other browsers to mean that your site will be HTTPS by default the first time the user visits it, because the browser is actually checking against all of those sites and just always using the SSL version. This is what it looks like if you go into Chrome DevTools. So what you can see is if you zoom in here, then I go to stripe.com, and what I'm actually getting is this, in DevTools it shows as a 307, as an internal redirect, but what's actually happening is you can see that it's oh, there is a time in there somewhere, but basically no time is involved because you put the URL in and it automatically just swaps you around to the default, the secure version. Some motivation for you or for other people. So 150 million, can anyone guess what $150 million might refer to here? My salary. Ah, I like you. I want to live in your world. No, it is sadly not my salary. It's the projected average cost of a data breach in 2020. So whilst HTTPS is not going to solve all your problems there, it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I would much prefer this number to be associated with coming into my bank account rather than going out of the company's bank account when it comes to a court case. Okay, and pages are responsive. This one I actually feel is, this message has really come across now, so pretty much everybody is primarily browsing on mobile phones. But what I would say is that when we say responsive here again, much like I said, don't chase the score, right? Don't necessarily mean that responsive means that, oh, I have to have the same page displaying on both desktop and mobile. What responsive means, did I include a slide for this? Oh, I include an example, that's even better. What responsive means is that we want to ensure that the user has a worthwhile and appropriate experience regardless of the device that they're browsing on. So that could mean that you're actually doing adaptive. Maybe you're serving something different depending on the user agent. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have CSS that is going to scale appropriately. All it means is that when I visit the site, that you're taking into account the device I'm visiting it on and giving something appropriate. I think actually in a wider sense, this encompasses accessibility as well. So you want to start thinking about, am I visiting with a screen reader? Am I visiting with a robot of some kind to crawl the site? So it's not about just resizing the window, it's about giving the user something appropriate for their user agent. So we can see here, oh, this is a sneaky little way of me introducing accelerated mobile pages as well. So I'm hanging around for the rest of the day. If you want to come talk to me about various web topics or various googly topics, then I'm happy to do that. Accelerated mobile pages is one of the technologies we released, 2 years ago now? But as an example here, you can see that we have the AMP by example site where, boom, you visit on desktop, you visit on the phone, and you get an appropriately sized version. But this is really what I wanted to put across here. Responsive is a goal. It's not a technical sort of attribute. It's an artifact of the site rather than instructions about how to develop it. Okay, add to home screen. Ooh, who has like a web app added to their home screen? Yes? Oh, this is nice. Oh, what web app do you have added? Just shout. Wait, really? Because I didn't see that in Lighthouse. Did it prompt or did you manually add it? Ah, okay, yeah. Okay, so one thing that you'll see then is, again, if you go into DevTools and you take a look at the application tab on the site, then it will give you a visual view of what is in the website's manifest. If a website doesn't have a manifest.json associated with it, then you can still force add to home screen, but effectively what is happening is that add to home screen is just a bookmark that is going onto your home screen. The manifest allows you to have more control over what this sort of super-powered bookmark is going to look like. So on the Twitter site, you can see there's a name, there's a short name, and interestingly, there is a start URL. You can control the various theme colors, the preferred orientation, and the display aspect as well. So display is either like standalone minimal UI or browser. Now, Chrome will automatically prompt to add to the home screen if you fulfill certain criteria. So those criteria are, you have a manifest, you have the standalone display set. Standalone means that it will appear as a complete app. There will be no browser Chrome displayed around it. And you also have a service worker registered, which we will get onto shortly. Inside of DevTools, you can actually force Chrome to show that. So if you're either on a mobile, on a desktop device, or you have connected to an actual mobile device via remote debugging, you can use the test the event button there to actually trigger the display that will come up. Chrome does it by showing a button. I believe Opera does it by actually changing the address bar. The Samsung browser does the same thing. And interestingly as well, Microsoft announced that what they are doing inside of Edge and Bing is that now, if you have a manifest, they're going to start indexing that and make your site available in the Windows Store as well. So they're really pushing the idea that a web app can be like a first-class citizen alongside native apps as well. And we're approaching the point where users won't really see a difference. For a user, it's just an app. They don't need to understand the technology behind it. Okay. The bare minimum you need then is the name, the short name, start URL, and some icons for your site. You can also, oh yes, if you have your laptop and access to GitHub or appropriate storage, you can go and add this right now. However, don't deploy it yet because I'll give you a warning later about some of the kind of the risks of doing this. Add to home screen is seductively easy to implement because you're literally pushing a JSON file on the site and updating the header. But there are some things to consider with how the user experience changes when you do this. You can also, like I mentioned, you can set a few other things. So display is a good way to sort of dip your toe into this. So if you don't want the user to be prompted to add to home screen, but you still want to provide a richer experience, setting display to browser here will mean that even if the user has the icon on their desktop, when they tap that, they will be taken back into a new tab in their browser or a new window or whatever is appropriate for them. Okay. Now, in Chrome, if you go to the Chrome flags, you can start to see a hint of some of the things that we're doing in the future. Here, we have a flag called Improved Add to Home Screen. And what that does is when you add a site to your home screen, if it fulfills these criteria, then rather than just being a bookmark that appears, we actually wrap it in an APK and install it onto your phone. So the site now appears as an app on your device. And it's in all senses of the app. You can go and look at the info for it. You can see how much bandwidth it's been using, how much battery it's been taking up. You can add the shortcut to your home screen or see it in the app list. Or also, if it's registered the domain it's responsible for as well, then when you tap a link, it will, this is the Twitter Lite. Because I did this before they branded it Twitter Lite, so it still just says Twitter. But it does mean that when I open Twitter links, this actually feels like I'm getting excited about something being an app, but this is the case. It's just opening the site, but as far as I'm concerned, it's just functioning like an integrated app on my phone. See, this is just a normal website. Oh God, it's too early to be enthusiastic about this. Okay, so more numbers for you then. This is AliExpress, so a shopping site. They did a big kind of like progressive web app rebrand, and they focused on doing like a really good mobile experience, enabling add to home screen, and they actually saw a 4 times increase in user interaction and engagement from users who had chosen to add the app to their home screen. So I've thrown these slides in with big numbers, so you can take these back to business people and show them the big numbers and say, this is why I want to do this thing over here, because there is a number associated with it. Okay. Now, some of the risks of doing add to home screen then is if we raise the user expectations like this, of allowing a user to add the site to their home screen and have it act like an app, they're going to start expecting it to behave more like an app, which means that I'm not going to check my network connectivity before I tap the icon. What I don't want to happen is for me to now tap my Twitter icon and to just be confronted with like either a spinner or even worse, like my browser's error page, which is going to be very confusing for users because after a while, they're not going to remember, like, was this an app? Is this a site? Why am I tapping my airlines icon and seeing my browser's like error? Has my phone been hacked? Has something gone wrong? So what you need to do is you need to ensure that if you are enabling add to home screen, then you are responsible for raising the bar on the user experience, meaning you have to take into account that there is some offline functionality available. You have to take into account that if you have chosen to use standalone mode, you have taken away the browser UI, meaning that you have to give that back to the user in terms of showing them loading progress, showing them touch responsiveness on elements. So all of the things that you may have learned in your human-computer interaction courses about Nielsen's usability heuristics, these are all now applicable because you are actually taking what was a site and you are, rather than being content that is loaded inside of an existing client, you are now responsible for creating the client as well. So you have to provide that additional UI to give the user that feedback. First thing then is the start URL that you specify in the manifest. You want to make sure that that will always load regardless of network connectivity. And the way we do that then, I keep forgetting the site examples that I've used for this. This is another segue into a random piece of technology. Who's heard of the physical web? Really? 1, 2? Okay. Does everyone have Bluetooth enabled on their phones? Okay. And if you've ever seen, I'm going to ramp the transmission power right up and drain my battery on this. If you're getting bored, you can look in the Play Store for the Beacon Toy app. And what this does, okay, that's broadcasting. You might eventually see this. I also have a beacon in my bag that broadcasts this, but effectively what it's doing is it's just broadcasting a URL which happens to go to this page here. So if you've ever seen like a little low priority notification about websites around you, that is what is powering this technology. It's just Bluetooth beacons broadcasting a URL. Where was I going with this? Oh yes, offline. What you can see then is if you jump back into DevTools, then if you load this site for the second time, you'll actually look down and you'll see all these responses are saying they're coming from the service worker. So the service worker then is, well actually, who knows what a service worker is? Yeah? Okay, only a few of you, which is fine because service workers are incredibly useful and incredibly powerful, which also means they give you the ability to screw up your website in crazy new and interesting ways. Because essentially what a service worker is it is a piece of JavaScript that you specify for your site that can then run in the background at all times. So it's kind of like a small piece of installed JavaScript that you can supply for a given domain. And what that means is that you can now start to do things like caching requests on the site. You can receive incoming push notifications and then display the notification for the user and take them to an existing part of the site. Effectively, you can sit in between the browser and the internet and you can intercept every single network request that is going in and out of your page and transform it or do something interesting with it. I would recommend being restrained in your explorations of Service Worker because you can also run into the issue where it's bad enough trying to deal with browser cache and trying to work out, hey, we pushed a new version, but everyone is still seeing the broken version. It's even more exciting with Service Worker where you've introduced another layer of potential caching that you need to be responsible for. So a very simple version then is, again, pop into DevTools, look at the Application tab, explore Service Workers, and you can see the link there. So you can see that it'll tell you that it's activated and running. And I jump in. And service workers are effectively just a series of events that you want to listen to. So you can see the sort of the life cycle of the service worker and the other kind of events that it can listen. So I'm listening for the install event here. And then what I'm doing is this instructs the service worker not to shut down before it's finished all of these tasks. So whilst the service worker runs in the background, the browser does not give you unlimited license to run JavaScript for as long as you would like. There are controls and sandboxes in place to make sure that you're not able to destroy the experience for the rest of the phone. But here you can ensure that this function will at least continue until it's finished. And what I'm essentially saying there is if you go and look at the site itself, you'll see where I've defined the actual cache name that I'm interested in. But you can ask the browser to open up the caches, and then I'm basically just telling it, I want you to add all of these paths to the cache. So that means when the user hits the site, the service worker will be installed, the install method will fire, and if you actually go and look at the network requests when the page first loads, you'll see all of these additional requests firing off to go and fetch all of the cached information. So what this means is that you can do things like ensure that that page will always load regardless of the user's connectivity. Because you can intercept network requests as well, there's similarly a fetch event where you can do that. And what you can do there is you can do things like go off to see if you can get a response from the network. If you can't, you fall back and show some kind of error page instead. So this means if the user loses connectivity halfway through browsing, you can instead take them to a page which is saying something like, oh, sorry, it looks like you're offline, tap here to retry later. You could even supply a little timer, so you could do a countdown, try again in 30 seconds. So suddenly, you have the potential to create this far richer, more robust experience for the user, entirely independent of whether they're suddenly going through a tunnel or not. Okay, site works cross-browser. I'm not going to say too much about that because, frankly, we could have an entire talk on that depending on how many browsers you need to support. But what I really wanted to get across here, and actually, how much time do I have left? Because I'm wondering how quickly we have to go through the rest of everything. Did anyone pay attention to the schedule? Oh, we have 15 minutes. Perfect. Okay, good, good. This brings us to a convenient kind of point I want to make here. Site working cross-browser, much like the responsive part as well, this is the important bit here. So the progressive in progressive web apps. Service Worker is an incredible technology, but not all browsers support it yet. There's one notable browser that doesn't support it yet. But what this means is that much like any form of web development, the best practice is always to ensure that you check to see what features are supported in the client and provide an experience that maps to the browser that the user is using at the time. So you always want to gracefully fall back and provide a less rich but still functional experience for people regardless of the client that they're visiting. So for example, if I fire up links, which I'm sure everyone has installed, and hit php.net, then well, I could have picked a better theme for you to see this with, but this is the point. I can hit that URL from whatever browser I choose, and I will still have a usable experience. So that's something that I really want to try and hammer home. Progressive web app does not mean that you're only supporting a subset of users who happen to have the latest and greatest version of whatever their favorite browser is. It means that you are providing an experience that covers everyone who hits your site. Up to a point. I mean, most people are probably not still browsing in IE6 anymore, maybe a few masochists out there, but again, they're probably not your most valuable customers either. Okay. Page transitions do not feel like they block on the network. This is another point where either Service Worker or JavaScript comes in. Like I was saying, if you take away the indication that the browser is loading, and you also start to take away the indication to the user that they're even on a web page anymore, then they're going to want to see responses as soon as they start interacting with the page. An example of this is actually on Facebook. So what I did here is Facebook do not have a progressive web app, but I feel like they really show the aspect of the progressive part. So they actually take each piece of technology that works for them and apply it in their site. They do a very nice thing here where, so on my feed, I have posted a work-related link to the open source project, and I see that someone has liked the link. So I'm going to tap into the story to see what happens. And of course I tap, and this is the interstitial page. So this is the point that I really wanted to make, is as soon as I tap that link, the first thing I see is this loading indicator. So even if you take away all of the browser interface, I still know that something is going on, and I still have this indication of progress. And eventually I get my story and see that the only person who liked it was my dad, because he dutifully likes everything that I post. But so this is the point I really want to make, is ensure that whenever I interact with something on your site, you show me something to let me know that that interaction has taken place. It doesn't need to be like a single page app navigation. It can be something as simple as whenever I tap a link, you're just looking for those events and you display an overlay spinner. So as long as I have some indication that there is activity going on, that's fine. And of course, these are the sort of Nielsen's usability heuristics. These all still apply. If it's going to take 0.1 of a second, that's fine, just do it. If it's going to take 1 second, show some kind of indicator. If it's going to take upwards of 10 seconds, then you should show some kind of indicator of progress in terms of where I'm actually reaching the end. That does not mean showing me one progress bar and then replacing it with another progress bar and then replacing it with another progress bar. And additionally here, this can also be a useful place to do something adaptive as well. So if the loading is taking a long time, then after a point, maybe show me some UI to allow me to cancel that interaction and go back and maybe perhaps try the task again later. I think I've hammered that point home now. Okay, each page has a URL. Again, this bit really is more for JavaScript developers than PHP developers. But as people do more with front-end frameworks, this does become more of an issue. You do want to make sure that when I say every page has a URL, the thing to think about here is, what is that URL being used for? If it's a publicly indexable URL or publicly indexable content, you definitely want everything to have a URL because you want search engines to be able to find it. When you share that link with a friend, you want it to unroll correctly and show them the right preview information. If you post that link to Facebook, you want the right metadata to be fetched. However, what I will say here is if it's stuff that is behind a user login or stuff that's transitory, so like the checkout process, or maybe they are posting a message, you can get away with not having a URL for those things because there is actually very little value in the URL as a sort of tool for moving that content around after that. Okay, and Pokedex.org. So this is another example of being able to do this stuff inside of a single page app as well. So if you go to Pokedex.org, I'm quite happy if you do this now because they have really good transitions on the site. If you tap one of those, there's actually a nice like animation of that coming out and filling the page. But what they also do is they use the history API. So you'll see that even though it's a single page app, they're pushing a different URL in there. So they're basically pushing the navigation state into the browser. So you can do this. You can push the like the name of the page, the URL that the user's on. You can additionally push other arbitrary information along with that. So some of the interesting things to do here would be if I'm in a very long list and I navigate to the next page, you could actually push the scroll position for the list. So when I return, I'm actually brought back to the same position in the list rather than just being brought back to the top of the page. Or to be honest, any other information that is useful for the user's journey, you can push that into the stack so that you can pop it back out again when the user goes through the back navigation. Okay, we've done baseline. So now we're going to take a whistle-stop tour in 5 minutes through the exemplary track. I really only want to give you a taster of what's possible here because hopefully you will take pity on me and come talk to me later and we can go into more detail on some of these things. Okay, exemplary then, indexability and social. You want to make sure that not just do these things have URLs, but that these things are actually available to, I should really change that. Site's content is indexable by any search engine or any robot that might be interested in reading your public data. You provide the schema.org metadata or the Open Graph data or the Twitter data, whatever you need for that content. Okay. User experience as well. Like I was mentioning, in the history API, you want to make sure that the content doesn't jump around as the page loads. That means either a new page loading or when you're going back through the pages as well, and that you retain that scroll position. And also importantly, this has come up quite a bit where I tap into a form to start typing something, and it's at the bottom of the page, and the keyboard scrolls right over the form, and I have to try and guess what I'm typing or try and scroll down. There are things you can do. So this link here will actually take you to a bunch of information about how you can use, I think it's the scroll into view event, but you can ensure that you actually push the content above the keyboard so the user has a good experience there. And this is what I'm talking about. You're on a site, you see a picture of a cat. Naturally, your inclination is to tap the picture of the cat because you would like to see it in all its glory. And as you're doing so, you don't realize that the page is still loading, so you're just about to tap when suddenly an ad pops in there, and instead of the cat, you're left with this. So please try and avoid creating sites that do this to me. Twitter does this, actually. When I search for stuff. I search for someone's name, and just as I'm about to tap their name, they suddenly pop in the trending tags, and suddenly I'm learning about One Direction or something rather than... Anyway, okay, user experience. This is one of the other interesting ones, is if you are in a standalone mode and you've taken away the URL bar, the user now doesn't have a way of easily accessing the URL to share that content. So again, make sure that you provide affordances to the user to share that content where it's appropriate. The other thing is, I talked about add to home screen being something that Chrome will prompt if the criteria are met. That might not actually be what you want to happen, because it might be that I'm, say, partway through the checkout process, and Chrome suddenly says, hey, would you like to add the app to the home screen? You are probably more interested in me finishing my purchase rather than adding the app to the home screen. So what you can do is you can actually capture that event, and you can hold on to the permission to show, the prompt, and you can actually show it at a more appropriate time. So Air Berlin has done this. If anyone flies with Air Berlin, then you can access their progressive web app experience. I think, because they rolled it out as a beta, if you are on a direct flight with a pre-assigned seat, then they're actually pushing people through the experiment here to see what happens. But what they do is, when you've booked, they hold on to the permission, and then at the end of the booking process, they give you a message explaining that you can actually get your boarding pass via the website and save it offline, and then they give you the option to add to home screen. So instead of just popping it in front of the user and hoping they know what's going on, they actually tell the story and explain what's happening. So inside of here, you can see that I can go in, I can put my check-in details in, or if I've asked for a notification, that will actually begin this process as well. I can check in, boom, boom, boom. I can say, get my boarding pass here, and boom, I get a boarding pass. It's not super exciting, but it is exciting if you think that this is just a website. And again, what they're doing is they're pushing that into the service worker. So when you get to the airport, you don't have to try and work out what combination of credit card details and email addresses you need to use to access the airport Wi-Fi. You can just get your boarding pass and you can fly. And this is the code to do that as well. So you'll get this before install prompt event will fire. You can capture that to enable you to show the prompt at a more appropriate time. Okay. I'm wondering which bits I added in here that would be interesting for the final few minutes. Okay. Caching. I think everyone agrees performance is very fast, is very important. I very rarely met someone who says, oh, we're quite happy with the speed of our page. We don't need to improve it anymore. So there are a number of things that the service worker will let you do to really improve performance. And again, some numbers here. 30% faster loading time for housing.com. This, I would very much encourage reading the case study and also look up their appearance at Chrome Dev Summit, because they really went down the path of doing a lot of code splitting, getting a very fast first response so they can immediately paint something on the screen as soon as possible, and then progressively loading in the rest of the content as they went through. And that 30% faster load time led to a 40% lower bounce rate from the front page, 10% longer average session time, and 38% more conversions. Admittedly, I'm not going to say that's all progressive web app related, because they did also redesign the entire site, so you would hope that it was better than the previous iteration. But I like to think that some of the web technology did play a part in pushing that number up a little bit. I think, to be honest, most people would be happy if it was a 3% increase in conversions. So 38% is so big that I feel like I have to qualify it with some additional information there. And I also wanted to show you kind of the grandfather of progressive web apps. Flipkart famously decided to turn off their mobile website because they felt it wasn't performing well enough for them. They came back with their mobile.flipkart experience. One of the things they do here is they detect network connectivity using the Network Information API. So if I go offline, then they actually gray out the site and disable the elements that I'm not able to interact with. And as you're browsing around, they cache the products you're looking at. If you're on a search page here, this is, I have a very low threshold for things I find fun, but what you can do is if you search for products on there, view them, and then put your phone into airplane mode, the search results will be a mixture of like in color and black and white, showing you what stuff has been cached. This is how you access the connection information. And push notifications, okay. There's way too much to do here. What I would like to ask is, are there any questions? Yes?
Maybe in addition to your presentation, we had an iOS app for one of our customers, and we had to upgrade it recently, and we actually got declined in the App Store, and they told us, well, basically build a progressive web app because you're not cool enough to be in the App Store.
Oh, wow. They told you to go build a
website, but for marketing reasons, they wanted you to have a
okay.
in the App Store.
Yeah, one of
told us, go build a progressive
yeah.
website.
One of the things that I have found, and I think the sort of the state of the ecosystem will change as we move forward, is that I have actually encountered quite a few people who actually sort of resent the fact that they have to maintain like an Android app and an iOS app because they want that visibility in the store, but it's an overhead on their department because they're much more geared up to deliver an effective website. And what I would say is that we have found that the progressive web app side of things does have a benefit for iOS. Even though you don't have the service worker support on Safari, following all of the kind of improving the user experience, improving the performance, sees a boost across all platforms there as well. Okay, you can do push notifications. Here's a demo, here's some code. And, and it's very good. You can also do identity and payment. I have an entire presentation on this. Find me later and we can do that. But you know what? At a bare minimum, please add the right fields to your forms, because adding email means that, again, I tap into the field and I get a keyboard that actually has an @ sign on it and pulls my most recently used email addresses as well. Passwords, it's super nice. I can use something on my desktop. I save that. And then I come back to my mobile device, and it automatically signs me in. Oh, magical. Okay, this is what you need to do, your digital asset links. Oh, God, I'm sorry I'm like having to rush through this, but hopefully you're getting kind of excited and you can come find me afterwards and I can go into more detail. Again, big numbers, very impressive. That's the baseline checklist. This is what I hope you will go off and you will try and make your site do. You will think about how this is going to improve the experience for the user. And next, look at the Web Payments API, look at the Web Share API. This allows you to do native sharing from web pages. Look at the purple pattern as well. This is what housing.com used to sort of architect how they deliver their site very quickly. And thank you. Please go and leave a comment about how I should have timed my talk better on Joined In. And any other rating that you would like. Please find me on Twitter and ask me questions. I will be hanging around all day, and I'm more than happy to talk about this stuff because I get unreasonably excited about it. So thank you very much for listening.